So in holistic management, basically holistic management is a decision-making process. That's what it comes down to. And how we use that process is we develop a holistic context, meaning it's the context of how we want to live our life and, how we want, our land to be. And, it's about the resources we have available and what we have to produce to create a quality of life that we want to enjoy. And so we want to determine what is really truly important to us. So a holistic context is the driving force behind our lives and behind our business or our organization or whatever level we're talking about. Now I just want to make a point that the holistic context previously until a few months ago has been called the holistic goal. And then the reason that was changed is because it's not really like any other sort of goal. It really is quite a bit different. And so using the term holistic context has really, to me personally, made more sense because it really is all about our own either personal or business context and how we go about living our lives or conducting our business is going to be based on our own holistic context. And then in the third bullet point there, sustainability, we talk about the triple bottom line. We've got the social, the environmental factors, and the economic factors are all the things that we need to consider when we take a holistic perspective or when we're making decisions. And those are exactly the three same things that we talked about in the previous slide about systems that are very complex. And so that's why we need to take a holistic approach to decision making so that we can consider and do the best job that we can in making decisions that are going to be socially, environmentally, and economically sound and balanced, and taking into consideration the complexity of all of those three areas. Oops. Okay, let me click again here. Oh, too far. Okay, and so some of the key concepts in holistic management, and I just want to give you this background because it's very important in kind of understanding the whole decision-making process, is that nature does function in wholes. And we're going to talk about wholes in just a little bit and what does it mean to be part of a whole. But nature functions with these very complex interrelationships. So if you affect one thing in the whole in nature, maybe you eliminate one species or eliminate one plant in the environment, it's going to have an effect on all the other species that exist around it. So there are these very complex relationships. And in holistic management, we define what we are managing. Because although that seems pretty obvious that usually we know what we're managing, it isn't always clear, particularly when it comes to determining who makes the decisions, because sometimes people have a different view of who should be making the decisions in a business or even in a family. So that's one of the things that we'll talk about, and we also state what we want, what's most important to us, what our important values are. We consider the health of the ecosystem. And we also have in place a process for evaluating the decisions we make so that we aren't just assuming that we're right and going on from there and having a wreck. So there is a process for evaluating our decisions. We're also going to monitor for results because we want to make sure that, even though we put a lot of thought into making a good decision, that we are going to be able to catch, the first indicator that something's not going according to the way that we had planned and hoped. And finally, the feedback loop is going to be an important part of the holistic management decision-making process. And what that feedback loop is that we plan, we implement a plan, we monitor to see if things are going the way that we want. If they're not, we control, meaning we go back and try to get things back on track. And if things really are way off track, then we may have to go back and replan. So holistic management was developed by Alan Savory, and he was a game agent in Zimbabwe, the former Rhodesia. And over the last 40 years, after making many observations as to why the land was deteriorating and why there were so many social problems, you know, poverty and war and all of those sort of things, he came up with the holistic management decision-making framework. And so he does have a textbook out there that he and his wife, Jody Butterfield, developed. The second edition is available through the Island Press. And it's a very, I'd call it a very intense book, but it's full of a lot of really good information. And I highly recommend that to you in in making some changes to managing in a more holistic way. And let's see if we can, yeah, let's get rid of that there. Okay. Oh, go back one more. And again, holistic management helps you think about how you want to invest your resources, your time and your talent and your money, and so that you can create the quality of life you want and the kind of business that you want to create as well. So I'm going to use Craig's story, since he had planned to tell his own story. And in Craig's situation, Craig and I were, and several of us were involved in the WSU Kellogg project about holistic management. It also involved other studies that we did over the course of about 4 or 5 years, including Stephen Covey, enterprise facilitation, and Bob Chadwick's consensus building process. And it really, I know for me, it was life-changing. It really opened my eyes, and as it did for Craig, to really think about his life and what was important to him. And it really, again, it changed our perspective, and it also, I think, in all of us created a desire for change, to be able to maybe live our lives a little bit differently than the way that we were living them before. And so this brought up the possibility of maybe that there are other opportunities out there besides the way that he was, you know, working and living and doing the things that he was doing. And one of those opportunities that we're going to talk about is how he got involved in actually using goats as a form of vegetation management. And he travels around the Northwest with his goats, and using kind of a non-chemical, non-mechanical form of vegetation management with the goats. So the first thing that he had to think about was how to define his whole. So I mentioned, you know, nature functions in wholes. So you and I, we are a whole. We're our own self, and we're part of a family, right? So the family is another whole that we are a portion of. We're also part of the local community, and we may have a farm or another business that we're involved with, so that's another whole. And maybe that, you know, we're part of a cooperative as well, so that's another whole that we're involved with. And there may be other organizations and groups and other types of wholes that we are involved with as well. And again, it can go on to even higher levels, you know, onto the universe. We're all part of the universal whole, I guess you might say. So the whole, as we define it, there are 3 areas that we need to talk about. And those areas are who are the decision makers? In other words, who makes the day-to-day decisions in whether it be the family or the business? And although that seems pretty simplistic, it oftentimes, when it's discussed, oftentimes you'll find out that not everybody has the same idea of who's making the decisions in that particular family or business. So it is very important to know who makes the day-to-day decisions, who makes the important decisions, and who has veto power. And that's something that we want to think about too, because it may be that we have a landlord who's going to, you know, he's going to have say over how we're treating that land, or there may be somebody who perhaps you know, maybe has the veto power on how the money is spent, those sort of things. So it's important to actually list those people who are the decision makers. And then the blue area there is the resource base. And the resource base are all of those assets that we have. You know, it's maybe the land, the infrastructure, the the equipment or the animals. It also will include the people that we can get help from if we need help, that can serve as a resource for us. It's also the people that we affect. In other words, let's get rid of that message there. It also includes, for instance, our neighbors. Our neighbors should be part of our resource base, because what we do, the activities that we conduct on the farm, certainly may affect the neighbors, and so we have to keep them as part of our resource base and keep them in mind. So the resources can be, they can be actually, your land, your farm, your assets. They can be people. They can be organizations as well. The third part of that is the money. And that's it's a good idea just to write down, what do I, what do I have available to me? What money do we have in savings? What money do we have in checking? Do we have some CDs? Do we have loans or lines of credit that are available? But what exactly do we have available for the money part as well? So my question for you is, how would you define your whole? Well, with Craig and Sulani, the decision makers in their family and are Craig and Sulani. In their resource base, they have, we've listed just a few of the things here, but they have a daughter and grandchildren, the house, the land, the car, the customers, the neighbors, the friends. At this particular time, they have the barns and such as well. And in the money, it's what money they have available to us: salary, savings, retirement accounts, lines of credit, and business income. And so, so those are the things that are involved in their whole. And so let's see, let's go on from here. So what I just want to remind you of your assignment. The first assignment is going to be reading Chapter 4 at home with At Home with Holistic Management, the book, and also to define your whole under management. And again, page 53 can be a resource for that, At Home with Holistic Management. And so, so I encourage you to really think about who are the decision makers, who has veto power, what assets do you have, who affects you, who do you affect, how can they help you? Those parts are in the resource base. And then what money do you have available? So, okay, let's